what I wanted to do tonight was come back and finish the lesson that we started 2 weeks ago. And we may need to just start back from the beginning. I don't know that I'll go through it in as much detail as I started out with 2 weeks ago, because you've already heard it, but just to refresh our memories instead of trying to come into it cold. Plus, I had to go back later and figure out where I had to watch the video and figure out where did I stop. And now off the top of my head, I don't remember where I stopped. So we're just going to go back to the beginning.
Verse 20.
Verse 20. Well, I'm just going to start at the beginning. We'll start at 1 Samuel 17:1 and go through to the maps if we have time. Not really the maps, but okay. I do hate, though, that after everything that happened, y'all probably don't remember my joke, because when I watched the video later to see where I stopped, I looked at the beginning of it, and I had forgotten even later that night that I told that joke. So I'm gonna do it again. At my house, the kids love knock-knock jokes, and this is one of my favorite. Knock-knock. Goliath. Goliath down, you looketh tired. So there you go. I know. Not as many laughs the second time, but Goliath down, you looketh tired. Oh, that's one of my favorites. I don't know, one of the kids told a good knock-knock joke the other night, and it was actually funny. You know, sometimes they're not, and you just kind of have to humor them. But one of them told a good one at the table, and I'm trying to remember what it was now. Anyway. All right, so we are talking about David and Goliath. And as I was telling you, yes, sir?
I have a joke.
Okay, go ahead. Is it church appropriate?
It was the one I told you.
Oh, let's not. Let's not. I still...
Never mind.
Let's just say Tim told us a joke in the Welcome Center, and he said my reaction was funnier than the joke. All right, so y'all just use your imaginations. All right, so we started out by talking about where this took place. It was in the Valley of Elah, and 1 Samuel spends a few verses describing the scene for us. The Valley of Elah. It's a valley about 21 miles west of Jerusalem, west of what is the old city today. According to Google Maps, it's about a 7-hour walk. So 20 miles, 21 miles, 7 hours, maybe. I'm assuming not that much different. So from our standpoint, it's pretty close to Jerusalem, but for them, having to walk everywhere, it's a good ways across the country. And so they're out there. That puts them in between Jerusalem as we now know it. It was called Jebus back then. Between Jerusalem and the Philistine territory. So they've kind of met in the middle here. And they came to this valley, and they were on opposite sides of it. Both of them up in the hills, the Israelites and the Philistines. They were gathered to do battle. They had each camped on one side. They were ready to swarm down into the valley as needed, but each side kind of waited for the other to make their first move. I saw a show this week. I don't think I was watching it on purpose, but these guys were fighting. Have you ever seen this, where these guys will fight and they'll circle each other, and they're kind of trash talking, and they circle, and ideally, the fight. Well, I guess not ideally, because we don't want people to fight, but the thought is eventually they're going to start throwing punches. But if you've ever seen on a show or in real life when guys just keep circling each other because they're both waiting for the other guy, and people are finally just like, get on with it. That's how this is going. They're standing on opposite sides of the valley, and they're each waiting for each other to make the first move. And so out steps Goliath. He was the champion of the Philistines. He goes out to oppose the Israelites. And as I told you last week, depending on which Hebrew manuscripts you look at, he was either 6'6" or 6'6" or 9'9", approximately. That's one of those areas. And I want to be very clear here. I believe in the inerrancy of Scripture. I believe that the originals were inerrant. And I believe that we have reliable a reliable body of manuscripts that point us to the meaning of those originals. In some cases, in the Hebrew manuscripts, there may be two sets of manuscripts that disagree on numbers. Pretty much everything else they have correct. And we know one of those bodies of manuscripts is correct, but I'm not enough of a Hebrew scholar to know which. I like the 9'9" description. It could be 6'6". In neither case do I want to sound like I'm doubting the biblical text. I'm just telling you, I don't know which one is the original. I'm not a Greek expert either, but if this was New Testament, I would feel a little more confident in telling you which one was the original description. Either way, though, he was a big guy. Not a lot of 6'6" people running around either. There are some, but not a lot. And I certainly would be having to look at them like this. So he was an intimidating guy. And there's a description given of him in verses 4 through 7 about him coming out and challenging them. It says he wore a bronze helmet. He was armed with a coat of mail. I explained to you last time that skeptics will seize on that definition and say, well, they didn't have chainmail armor back then. We don't have a lot of specific English words to describe their armor. The Hebrew here describes scale armor. So sheets of metal, sheets of leather, things like that overlap each other in little pieces like snake scales. The Hebrew, see, people will say the Bible's not correct because it's describing a kind of armor they could not possibly have had. Now, if you look at the Hebrew, what that word means is exactly the kind of armor that they had in that day and age. So sometimes it's just a little... Sometimes English is kind of a weak animal to try to carry all of the baggage of the biblical languages, if that makes sense. And this is not new to y'all. We talk all the time about the word love. In Greek, there are at least 4 words for love. There's 1 in English. And so things can get a little confusing. We have to go and sometimes describe which type of love he's talking about. So, I'm telling you that to make sure you understand the Bible is not inaccurate here. We just have to dig down and understand what the Bible is actually telling us. All right, so he's wearing this scale armor. It weighed quite a bit. Jack, you told me last time how much that armor weighed. Do you remember?
Well, the spearhead was 15.
Spearhead was 15 pounds. I thought you'd given...
Find it again.
Yeah.
600 shekels, 5,000 shekels. His armor was 125 pounds.
125 pounds. Okay, so he's a
9'9" would be able to carry that.
He's a big guy.
6'6".
Yeah, big guy out there carrying this armor. Got this bronze javelin. He's got bronze armor on his legs. The shaft of the staff of his spear was like a weaver's beam. It's a pretty thick piece of wood. His iron spearhead weighed 600 shekels. By the way, when he said the 15 pounds, that's just the spearhead. That's not the beam. And that's going to take some muscle. That reminds me of the guys in Scotland that carry the big log out and they're trying to balance it and then they heave it. And I don't know how they do that. Goliath had to have strength like that or more to lift this spear that we're talking about. He stood out and he cried to the armies of Israel and said to them, "Why have you come out to line up for battle? Am I not a Philistine, and you the servants of Saul?" So he's coming out and he's challenging them to settle their dispute by single combat. I told you, he's saying, why duke it out? Why kill so many people? We can just fight one-on-one and we can settle it like this. It's not as altruistic as it sounds to say we're going to settle it one-on-one so everybody could be spared. If he wins, he gets to be the guy that defeated Israel. He did it single-handedly. So it's kind of an ego thing here. When he challenges them, he says, "Am I not a Philistine and you are the servants of Saul?" What he's saying here is, oh, you are the Israelites. You serve Saul. Oh, he's so amazing. It's some sarcasm here. And I'm a lowly Philistine. I'm nothing. Because that's kind of how they acted toward the Philistines. Is it little rascals? Dear Darla, you are the scum between my toes. You know, That's kind of their attitude toward the Philistines. Some of you look like you have no idea what I'm talking about. You do know what I'm talking about, right? Okay. Maybe you were just in shock that it came out in a mess.
You know about
Okay, that's what it was. I thought maybe it was just shock that it came up in a Bible lesson. That was their approach toward the Philistines. They were the scum between their toes, and that's what he's saying. I'm just a Philistine, and you are the Israelites. Why would you not want to come out and do battle with me? And so he issues this challenge. He says, send your guy out, I'll come out. If I kill him, y'all will be our slaves. If he kills me, we know that's not going to happen, then we'll be your slaves, as if. All right, and Israel says, I don't think so. They don't want anything to do with this suggestion. It says in verse 11, when Saul and all Israel heard these words of the Philistine, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. It's kind of funny. They are as afraid of one Philistine as they are of all the Philistines. And so David comes out. We talked about this a little bit last week. David shows up. He's running errands for his father. He's not even there for military purposes. I mean, he does do some things in service to Saul, but he seems to go back and forth between being the musician for Saul and being kind of an advisor and assistant to Saul, and then taking care of things on his father's farm. He's basically everybody's gopher at this point. So he goes out to the camp to run an errand for his father, and he hears the challenge. It tells us in verse 16 that the Philistine, Goliath, was coming out morning and evening, multiple times a day for 40 days, presenting this challenge. And so this is ongoing when David shows up and he hears it. We're skipping around a little bit, which is okay. David goes out there, and he obviously hears the challenge, and he hears about the challenge because he talks with them, and when he overhears this, David is offended. It says in verse 23, David heard them, and verse 24, and all the men of Israel, when they saw the man, fled from him and were dreadfully afraid. I am dreadfully tongue-tied tonight. They were dreadfully afraid. So Saul evidently had made an offer he thought the people couldn't refuse, for whoever would fight Goliath and kill Goliath. He said that man would be rich, he would have the king's daughter for a wife, and his whole family would be tax exempt. Sounds like a pretty good deal. There's just the minor detail of having to go kill the 9-foot behemoth out there, or almost 10 feet if he's 9'9". So there's this offer that's been made, and they're probably all talking about it, whispering about it. David gets wind of that as well, and he says, what is the king prepared to do? What is the king offering here? And in verse 27, by the way, I think this may be where I left off last week. He says, for who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? He says, who is this upstart pagan to talk to God's people that way? And I think I was in the middle of telling you last week, I don't think that ought to be our approach to every unbeliever. But I think God's people have lost a little bit of fire about that. We see stuff going on around us, and we act like we just have to sit back and take it and let it happen. We might need, when the pagan spirit of the age tries to run roughshod over the church and over God's people, we may need to get back to a little bit of who is this uncircumcised Philistine to defy the armies of the living God? Not because it's us, but because of who we serve. That was David's issue. Wait a minute. I know these Israelites, they work for God. And he's just going to get by with this? And by the way, I'm not suggesting either that we go to physical warfare against the pagan world either. I'm just saying, we shake our fist at the world and we wring our hands about what the world has done for the condition that things are in. I think that a big part of the reason why the world is in the condition it's in is because the church has just sat back and let it happen. Anyway, that's my social commentary for tonight. David was not willing to just sit back and let the Philistine continue to defy God. Who is this uncircumcised Philistine? And the people answered him in this manner, saying, so shall it be done for the man who kills him. They said, here's what, they filled him in, here's what the king has offered. David continues to ask questions. He continues to talk. People are listening to him talk. It looks like a crowd is gathering, and his brothers are starting to get irritated. Why have you even come down here? Because David, he's incensed. He's ready to say something. He cannot believe that this is happening. Have you ever been in a situation where you could not believe what was happening, and your spouse or maybe a friend that was with you kind of elbows you in the ribs or pulls you, let it go? No, I'm going to say something. Have you ever been in a situation like that? Or maybe you've been the one saying, no, calm down, it's fine. David was about to say something, right? And his brothers here, why are you here? Why do you have to come make a big fuss about this? Why? And David's saying, no, I will not calm down. Somebody needs to do something here. That's what he says in verse 29. What have I done now? Is there not a cause? Do I not have reason to be upset? Do I not have reason to be offended here? Then he turned from him toward another and said the same thing. So he turns to the crowd around him and says, seriously, do I not have a reason to be offended? And the implication there is, shouldn't you as servants of God also be offended by the way this Philistine is acting? Because it's really not the Israelites that he's mocking. It's God. Then he turned from him toward another and said the same thing, and these people answered him as the first ones did. Now, when the words which David spoke were heard, they reported them to Saul. So I think there's a little more that's not recorded word for word in here, because all we're seeing is David getting offended and asking questions. I have to assume, I could be wrong in this, but I have to assume there were some things like, we can't let him get by with this. You're telling me in this whole army there's not one man willing to stand up to him? By golly, I'll go do it if you're all so afraid. You know, to get from one verse to the next and make it make sense, I feel like there's almost got to be something that is being reported back to King Saul that David is causing a ruckus. As David continues to cause this stir, he does make it clear that his trust is in the Lord. Word gets back to Saul, and David is not getting into this with this sense of bravado. Hey, I can take on the Philistine. I'm big and bad. His trust is in the Lord. We see this in verse 37 as he's talking to Saul. Moreover, David said, the Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear, he will deliver me from the hand of the Philistine. So Saul has said, I don't know. I don't know if you're ready. And David says, but God is. God can handle this. And he tries to get David to go in his armor. I've heard different explanations for what this means about being untested in the armor, that it didn't fit or this or that. I think the most natural reading of the text and the most reasonable explanation is just that armor was heavy, and David wasn't used to wearing armor. He didn't wear armor to go tend sheep. You add some weight, and it takes away from your ability to do things. I know trekking up and down the side of a mountain is a lot easier when I'm not carrying Charlie than when I am. And he's not that heavy. He's a fraction of what I am, but man, you add a little extra weight, it really messes with your stamina, your strength, your speed, your agility, all of that. And so taking on this heavy armor that he hasn't practiced in is just not going to work for him. But David was not he wasn't trusting in his armor anyway. He wasn't trusting in any of that. We see in verses 38 through 47 that David goes out unprepared for battle, to the point that Goliath even questions him about it. In verse 43 it says, "So the Philistine said to David, 'Am I a dog that you come to me with sticks?' And the Philistine cursed David by his gods." Now I think that means Goliath was saying that his gods were going to tear David apart and all that. "And the Philistine," verse 44, "said to David, 'Come to me, and I will give your flesh to the birds of the air and the beasts of the field.'" Come at me, and I'm going to feed your carcass to the birds. And David said to the Philistine, "You come to me with a sword, with a spear, and with a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hand, and I will strike you and take your head from you. And this day I will give the carcasses of the camp of the Philistines to the birds of the air and the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. Then all this assembly shall know that the Lord does not save with sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hands." Now, for one, this is some excellent trash talk here. Because Goliath says, "You're just coming at me with sticks? What am I, a dog? I'm going to tear you up and I'm going to feed your carcass to the birds." And David says, "Okay, so first of all, you may need your swords and your spears and your javelins, but I don't. So I'm going to tear you up. I'm going to take that head clean off your shoulders. And not only am I going to give your carcass to the birds, but I'm going to give the carcass of all your buddies to the birds. How's that? And we'll see whose God is God." I mean, really, this is the template for, I'm not suggesting that you go trash talk people either, but if you are, I mean, you could have a worse template to follow here. Only do that if God has specifically told you to go fight the Philistine, right? There's some of these things that people look at. Well, this is an example. It's okay to do this because it happened one time in the Bible. Something happening one time in the Bible doesn't always make it okay. God gives very specific instructions. I mean, it doesn't mean it's okay for you and me to go do this. But we can learn from the principles here. David, again, this is not false bravado on his. The reason I want you to understand that he's upping the ante on the trash talk with Goliath, this demonstrates that he is really, really confident. This is not a guy who is cowering in battle, but it's not because he trusts in his own abilities. It's because he's trusting in God. It's because he knows that the giant is way too big for him, but God has got this. And so he goes out unprepared for battle. And I think the fact that he walks out and first of all, the fact that he walks out and is willing to do battle with the Philistine demonstrates his trust in God. The fact that he's willing to go out with the weapons that he does, he's outgunned, that demonstrates his trust in God. The fact that he's gone out there without fancy armor and all that, that demonstrates his trust in God. Everything David does demonstrates his trust in God. Yes, ma'am?
What it looks like to me when I read it is that, like, in the New Testament, it talks about the armor of God.
Mm-hmm.
So he didn't need the physical armor because he had the armor of God already.
Mm-hmm.
God had given him that insight, and he seeks God the whole time, because even in other passages, he's asking God, like, should I do this? Are you going to give me the victory? And then God's speaking back and telling him, yes, I'll give you the victory. So, he has that relationship with God, and he has the armor that he needs. And he's equipped, even though it may not appear physically that he is.
Right. That's very good. Yeah, there's a spiritual armor that can overwhelm the physical. That's good. Yeah. So I've heard the question asked: if he trusted God, why did he have 5 stones? And I think I mentioned this last time. it was not because he thought he was going to miss. Somebody was telling me a story about snakes on Sunday morning. I can't remember who it was, but Charlie had that little snake from his school fundraiser. That thing still keeps showing up random places in my house, and it needs not to. Charlie better make sure my life insurance is paid up before that thing gives me a heart attack. But somebody saw the way I was reacting to that toy snake and was telling me a snake story, talking about being out fishing. I don't remember who it was, if you're even in this room. But he said whoever he was out fishing with, a snake climbed in the boat, and he said his friend got out his pistol and just unloaded the whole magazine into the snake, and then they had to hurry to shore. And I thought, well, that's exactly what I would do. That or practice walking on water and just let the snake have the boat. But that would probably be me in a snake situation. Especially if it was real enclosed space. I'm just going to empty the whole magazine. Because what if you miss? That's why you have 8 bullets, is in case you miss the first time, right? He didn't take 5 shots because he thought he was going to need 5 shots for Goliath. I believe it's in 1 Kings. Talks about him going after Goliath. Again, this is another Hebrew issue that is above my pay grade to explain, but it's either Goliath's sons or brothers. There were 4 of them. That's pretty confident in the shots, right? If there's 5 people and you're taking 5 stones. That's like saying I'm going to walk around with 1 bullet. Why would you only walk around with 1? If you're convinced you're going to hit what you need to hit the first time, then you only need 1. So his 5 had nothing to do with a lack of faith in God. As a matter of fact, it demonstrated faith in God that he believed God was going to continue to use him after this battle. So we come to the real battle. The 2 moved in to fight. Goliath moved first, followed by David. And they don't get very far into the battle. And David makes this kill shot with his stone and his sling. Verse 49 says, Then David put his hand in his bag and took out a stone, and he slung it and struck the Philistine in his forehead, so that the stone sank into his forehead, and he fell on his face to the earth. I mean, so it hit him pretty hard between the eyes. So David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone, and struck the Philistine and killed him. But there was no sword in the hand of David. So David kills him with the sling. And then in one of the great examples of irony in the Scriptures, Goliath thought he was going to use his sword on David. Instead, he is beheaded with his own sword because, as Goliath said, I don't have a sword. Oh, look, here's one on the dead guy. So I'll use it to take his head off like he promised. The Philistines see this in verse 51, and they are stunned. Nobody was expecting this. I feel like the Israelites probably weren't even expecting this to happen. Reading Saul's comments on the subject, I feel like for him sending David out was kind of a Hail Mary. The football type of Hail Mary, not the... it was a last-ditch effort to try to do something, but it's a long shot. I'm not sure he expected it to work. And so everybody is stunned in verse 51. David ran and stood over the Philistine, took his sword and drew it out of its sheath and killed him and cut off his head with it. And when the Philistines saw their champion was dead, they fled. They were terrified. And it says that the Israelites followed them. They continued fighting the Philistines as they retreated. They cut them down everywhere they found them. The Israelites went and plundered the Philistine camps. They took Goliath's head back to Jerusalem as a trophy. And then in verse 55, this is a little strange. It's a little strange. But they start to ask about David. When Saul saw David going out against the Philistine, he said to Abner, the commander of the army, Abner, whose son is this youth? And Abner says, "As your soul lives, O king, I do not know." Sorry, I'm trying to flip the page here. The king said, "Inquire whose son this young man is." Then as David returned from the slaughter of the Philistine, Abner took him and brought him before Saul with the head of the Philistine in his hand. And Saul said to him, "Whose son are you, young man?" So David answered, "I am the son of your servant Jesse the Bethlehemite." Now, that's another area that skeptics have occasionally seized on and said, see, the story doesn't make sense. Because Saul and David knew each other before, didn't they? A couple of things could be going on here, and neither of them point to the story being made up. It's possible that Saul is seeing this and seeing David in a new light and saying, "Are we sure that's David? That can't be who I thought it was. You, the little harp player boy, the shepherd guy." It's possible Saul's saying, or maybe it's not him. That's possible. But I notice he doesn't ask who David is. I think there's maybe a simpler explanation here. He doesn't ask who David is. He asks, "Who are your people? Who's your father?" It goes back to the promise that he made to the family of whoever killed the giant. And yes, we could look at it and say, well, he should have known because he's met Jesse. He's familiar with David. Saul had lots of people around him. And it's entirely possible that while Saul was familiar with David from serving him, Saul had forgotten, he's the king. He's got a lot of people to remember and keep up with. He can't remember everybody's family tree. So it could be just a simple question, okay, who do I send the tax-exempt card to? Because I've forgotten. So skeptics will look at that and say, it doesn't make sense. He's acting like he doesn't know David, but he did know David. People forget.
How many Davids do we know?
That I don't know, how many Davids he knew.
So it could be that you want to know which David is this.
Yeah.
David, the son of Jesse, or David?
Right. And that's possible. I kind of assumed he knew which David it was based on them working together, and he's just had this conversation with him before that. My assumption, and I could be wrong because I assume wrong all the time, but my assumption was that it's just a simple case of, I know you and you work for me, but I don't care enough to keep up with your family. Who does the tax-exempt card go to? And I think it could be as simple as that. Nothing for skeptics to seize on. Yes, sir.
Not just the tax-exempt card, but part of the booty, if you will, was to go up and marry the Savior would be.
Oh, yeah.
Marrying his daughter.
Yes.
He doesn't want just some shepherd out there marrying his daughter. Oh, I need to know more about your family.
Right.
Because you're going to marry my daughter, you're going to become part of the family.
Yes, that's true. And yes, and not only that, because he's going to be part of the family, so I need to know who your people are, but also I think the dads, if they're going to arrange a marriage, the dads are going to have to sit down and have a conversation at some point. So I don't think I think the skeptics have overblown this, saying, well, the story doesn't make sense because he knows who David is and then he doesn't. I think he's trying to remember where David fits, but not that he has forgotten David. Okay, questions or comments on the David and Goliath story? Okay. Well, then I'm going to move, probably more quickly move through chapters 18 through 27 than I did just chapter 17. Because there are some stories that go on through chapters 18 through 27 that deal with what happened next and the way Saul treated David after this and the way David treated Saul, that show us some things about David, show us some things about Saul, and they set the stage for God fulfilling His promises to David and making David king. David being king is one of the highlights in the story. Remember, as we're going through this story by story to see how these stories all fit together and how the overall story of the Bible points to the cross, David becoming king is one of those highlights of the story, one of the really prominent waymarkers, because it shows us, because David, the prophecies about David's kingdom are ultimately fulfilled in Jesus Christ. And so what we're about to get into gets really important in pointing to Jesus and the Messiah coming exactly when and how he did. All right, so chapter 18, there's a story in here where David begins to go and do battle on Saul's behalf. He goes out as a military man, and he's pretty good at it. And so the people, David becomes popular among the people because they see his heroics, and they start to praise him for that. And they even began to, it says in verse 6, "Now it happened as they were coming home, when David was returning from the slaughter of the Philistine, that the women had come out of all the cities of Israel, singing and dancing, to meet King Saul with tambourines, with joy, and with musical instruments. So the women sang as they danced and said, 'Saul has slain his thousands, and David his 10,000s.'" Which doesn't sound like a real catchy tune to me, but in Hebrew maybe it was. But they were singing and dancing, "Saul has slain his thousands." It's pretty good. But David has slain his 10,000s. How do you think Saul reacted to that?
So easy upset.
Yeah, that was not his favorite song.
Pride, yeah.
Pride, yes, pride got hold of him. Yeah, verse 8 says Saul was very angry. As a matter of fact, Saul started to grow paranoid about David. As he's hearing people, I mean, if you're the king, you want the people to be loyal to you. You want the people to love you. You want the people to fear you. But he's going through the streets and villages of Israel, hearing people sing songs about David. And that's got to make him a little paranoid, because when you're a king, things like that make you start thinking coup. So he gets a little paranoid. He's afraid that David might try to overthrow him and seize the throne. Because, I mean, why not? If you're starting to be popular with the people, why not make a play for power? And so he began looking at David very suspiciously. Now, there's one day, we see in chapter 18, that while he's overwhelmed by his fears and these spirits that would come over him, David's playing the harp. He's just there doing what he's supposed to do. He's serving the Lord. He's serving Saul. He's playing the harp. And Saul just gets I can't even think of a word to describe it. He gets not in his right mind. And he picks up a spear and he throws it at David. And he missed, fortunately. And David got out of there. I think I would too. But David got out of there as quickly as he could. Saul's plan was, I will pin David to the wall. And I don't think he meant by his cloak. I think he meant, I'm going to pin him to the wall. And so David fled. David got out of there. David escaped, but he was sent off to lead a regiment in the army. Because Saul, when he came to his senses and realized what he had done, he thought, oh boy, I just tried to kill that man, and I'm already worried about his power and his influence and all this. He might really want to come after me now. So Saul says, David, let's give you a promotion and put you in charge of a military unit over there, away from the palace. So Saul dealt with his fears that way. And Saul also offered his daughter Michal in marriage to David. He was hoping to maintain the peace, because that's part of what they did. Back in that day, they would marry people off to solidify alliances. I saw something on the internet where somebody said, She wanted me to treat her like a princess, so I sold her off in marriage to solidify the alliance with Poland. And I thought it was funny. I would never do that, but that's how things worked back in that day and age. They would marry people off to solidify alliances, and Saul thought, I'll give him my daughter Michal, which was a girl's name then, and then we'll be connected, we'll be allied until I can arrange for him to die in battle. Which, by the way, is something David does later on to somebody else and gets in trouble for. But I'm going to have him killed in battle. So Saul begins sending him out on deliberately dangerous missions to try to get him killed. But David was so skilled in battle, and he was so close to the Lord, and he was so protected by the Lord, that he kept escaping these dangerous missions. And on top of that, when Saul sees all of that, it really begins to irk him. And keep in mind, at this point, David's just doing what he's supposed to do. Not saying David is sinless, but David is he's doing right. He's not doing anything wrong. He's serving the king. He's serving God. He's doing all these things. Saul sees how successful he's being, and he's just even more upset. And he also sees how much Michal's loyalty has gone toward David as opposed to her father, and he can't handle it. So we get to chapter 19, and Saul just flat out orders his servants to kill David. No more of this trying to accidentally get him killed in battle. They just need to kill him. Fortunately, David's closest friend was a man named Jonathan, who also happened to be Saul's son. And it's kind of a weird dynamic here, because you would think Jonathan would not get along with David, because if David's going to end up on the throne, that means Jonathan doesn't. And he, I think, would have been next in line. He went out and warned David, you need to lie low. You need to just stay out of Dad's eye line for right now. And so David survived the assassination attempt. And once more, Saul kind of came back into his right mind and recruited David to come back and serve him both as a warrior and a musician. But we see in chapter 19 again that Saul gets out of his head. It's really a roller coaster thing with Saul. He gets out of his mind again, and he tries to kill David. And so Michal, his wife, Saul's daughter, along with his friend Jonathan, Saul's son, they help David escape. And by the way, that probably ratchets up the tension as well, because Saul sees his own family are now more loyal to David than they are to him. So we get to chapter 20, and there's a pledge of loyalty between David and Jonathan. David says, I will do my best to protect you from Saul. In return, David said, I will repay this kindness when I become king. I'll take care of you and your family. They helped David get away, and David had to stay on the run for quite some time. We see over the course of, and I really am skimming through really fast here. I encourage you to go back and read these stories because they're just incredible. But we see in chapter 22 and 23, there were times that he hid in caves while he was on the run. In chapter 21, there's an incident where he even lives off of the showbread in the tabernacle. If memory serves, this becomes an argument that's used in the New Testament about things that are necessary and whether God permits certain things. David eats the tabernacle showbread, even though by the law it wasn't intended for him, but God allows it to happen in this case because David and his men were about to die of hunger and exhaustion. There's another time in chapter 23 where David goes and hides among the Philistines. And you might say, well, they're his sworn enemies. How does he get by with hiding among the Philistines? He pretends to be insane. And they let him stay there. He pretends to be crazy, and they just let him be among them and do his thing. I think, presumably, to irritate Saul. It's one of these, the enemy of my enemy is my friend kind of thing. In chapter 24, we see there was an incident where Saul got close enough to David in this dark cave. And my understanding of the text is Saul went into the cave to use the restroom in privacy. David's hiding there in the darkness of the cave, and while Saul is taking care of that, David cuts away a section of Saul's robe. soon thereafter, Saul is chasing David down, and David comes to Saul and says, "You doubt my loyalty. After all this time, you doubt my loyalty? Do you realize I could have killed you, and I didn't?" And he presents the strip of cloth and says, "I was that close to you in that cave, and I spared your life." But this display, him seeing the mercy that David showed toward him, it temporarily softened Saul's heart toward David. For a moment, Saul kind of breaks down and says, "What have I done? How could I doubt you?" And things sort of go back to the way they were. In verse 26, there's an interesting story about a man named Nabal and his wife Abigail in chapter 25, but it really doesn't, it's not crucial to the story of David and Saul. Chapter 26, though, David is forced to go on the run again. Saul gets out of his mind again. And so David sneaks into Saul's camp. And while he's in there, he takes Saul's spear and his water jug so that later on he could go back to Saul when he gets the chance and say, "Again, you're doubting my loyalty. I've spared your life once. You doubted my loyalty. You've tried to kill me I don't know how many times. But I had the opportunity to kill you again. I was in your camp. I was in your bedroom." I assume they use tents or things like that. "And look, I have your jug and your spear." And Saul realized again, wait a minute, this man is not after me. And he blessed David. And then we see in chapter 27, they kind of went their separate ways. There's this uneasy peace, and they kind of agree that it's probably best for everybody if they go their separate ways. But Saul the whole time is afraid that David is going to come back one day and kill him. And David goes to the Philistines and makes an alliance with them temporarily because he needs some place to be where Saul can't get him, and what better place than the Philistines? And that sets the stage for the battles that will eventually lead to David becoming king.